Hi, welcome everyone. As you are aware, today's workshop is about interview skills. I know most of you are in high school or recently graduated, and so you're just getting into the workforce. So today's presentation will be to teach you about interviews and hopefully prep you for your next job interview. So here's the agenda. It may seem a little overwhelming what we're going to cover. So just the first thing we'll be going over is why are we here? The second will be the different types of interviews and just talk a little bit about those. Then next we will talk about what to do before the interview. And then after that we will discuss things to prep for the interview itself and your behavior, mannerisms, your dress, you name it. Then we will go over online interview skills because especially in today's climate, things tend to be more virtual. And so while they have some of the same skills, there are a few other things to keep in mind when doing those. Then we will also cover some common mistakes, so you can combat those before they happen. Then we will also look at two videos and compare and contrast about things the person did that were good and things that were bad. And so I can give you a clear example of what to do and what not to do. After that, we will break out into partners for about 10 minutes. We will have a list of interview questions up on the screen, and you can take turns asking one another, practicing the skills that we have discussed so far. And then finally, I will list a few resources that will help you and you can use after you leave this workshop. All right, so first question, why are we here? I'm sure most of you are here so that you can develop your skills. I'm sure some of you are here by choice. I'm sure some of you were strongly encouraged to be here. So first off, we'll learn about the job interviews themselves. We'll work to develop our interview skills, cover the mistakes, and then we will do our practice. Those are the four main things to take away from that little list of agenda that I just shared with you. Okay, so these types of interviews, these are the most common interviews that will take place at this time. So pre-interview, these can be considered also like an application online. You have a lot of jobs nowadays before you can actually apply online. They have you answer some questions to make sure that it's a match ahead of time. So these answers are really important. So they should be well thought out. And then some places will also can do a pre-interview or different rounds of interviews. So they may call you on the phone and talk to you briefly before they ask you to come in for a real interview. But all the same skills that you learn for interviews in general can be applied during that. And then we also have in-person individual interviews. So that is when you go in by yourself and you are interviewed by either one person or a few people at the company. But it's just you and them and you are answering their questions. Another option is in-person group interviews. So that is when a company will bring in a few people at a time and ask the same questions to everyone. This is done to save time and to be able to compare different types of people. And then lastly, we have online or phone interviews. These, as we know, with the current situation, in-person things are a lot less likely. So definitely seen a lot more online interviews via Zoom or Skype or phone as a means to do interviews. So again, the overall skills of interviews you will use during those as well. But there are a few other things to remember for those. Okay, so next we will be looking at what to do before the interview. So before the interview, you want to research the company. You want to look up their different policies, what they believe in, their values, and just have a general background information. First of all, to know if you want to work there, but then also just in preparation for when they ask you questions, you won't be blindsided or not know the answers. And it'll just help with your overall confidence as you go into the interview. It is also helpful to practice interview questions. We will go over some later in the workshop together and then in individual groups. And I will also provide you with a resource to take home so that you can do those, so you can practice the day before your interview. Another helpful thing would be to prepare your own questions. When you have your own questions for the interview, it shows that you're engaged that you want to know more, that you've really taken time to learn about their company. You can ask questions about their company or how it's run or specific things like that. And it's also just important to ask like your own personal things, like benefits or pay or things like that as well. And then, of course, you also want to dress in a professional manner. So the best thing to do for this would be to plan it in advance. Make sure you are appropriately dressed and get that in advance. So this means don't be wearing t-shirts with slogans on them, don't have ripped jeans, don't be wearing your dirty old sneakers that you wore to the gym. You don't necessarily have to wear a blazer if you're going for an interview in a business setting. Then absolutely a blazer or dress pants, that type of thing would be appropriate. But any type of collared shirt or sweater or anything like that, you just don't want to be too showy. You don't want to show off parts of your body. Just think about respectful. So at the end of this and the resources, I also do provide a list of places that are affordable that you can get clothes like this, because I know you're thinking a dress shirt, wow, that could be really expensive, but I mean, you can always find things vintage. Value Village is a good place for this type of stuff, as well as, again, at the end I have a list of cheap stores to get this type of thing, so you don't have to worry about that. Another thing to do before the interview is make sure that you bring a hard copy of your resume. It is likely that you have already sent one to this place if they were contacting you for an interview, but it always is really helpful to show up with one that you can give to them and they can make notes on, or it's just a really good idea. Another thing, make sure you're not late for your interview. A lot of these things are timed in a very particular way, and it also just shows that you're punctual and that you're ready and that you're taking this seriously. Another thing that not everyone thinks about is you might be in a waiting room or be waiting with other people who are getting interviewed, and it is very important to remain professional while doing so, because you're already there, and so they're already getting their first impression of you. So as you can see in this photo, the first picture, he's sitting up straight. He's just focused on what he's doing. Another one, he's slouched, leaning over, looking on his phone, not engaged, and just frankly looks sloppy. So it's important to remember that when you're waiting as well. Okay, so now during the interview itself, it is great to always start with a handshake and an introduction. They generally will already know who you are, but that is really professional. That being said, with the way things are right now in the pandemic, handshake might not be appropriate, but it is appropriate to make sure you have that introduction. You don't have to shake their hand, but just say, hi, it's really great to meet you. My name is so-and-so. And it is also important to end the interview this way as well. Thanks again, so-and-so. It was really nice meeting you. And throughout the interview, it's really important to maintain positive body language. So again, not slouching over, not resting your hand on the table, not fidgeting with yourself or your hair or anything like that, but just be upright and show that you're engaged. And when you're talking, speak with your hands, things like that. It's also really important to maintain eye contact with whoever you're speaking to. Of course, don't stare at them like that, that's uncomfortable for everyone, but just ensure that you are taking the time to connect with them, because that shows you're professional and that you're mature. And so just remain engaged. At some point, they might start talking about a company policy or something that may not be of the most interest to you at this time, but it's important that you remain listening and nodding and show that you're still engaged in the conversation, even if they're just speaking. So that being said, it's also important when you're talking about yourself and answering the questions that you are able to reference your accomplishments. For some of you that are new to the workforce, this could be just anything you've learned from your previous job or things you've learned in school or your extracurriculars or your hobbies, anything like that. And it's important to be confident but not cocky. So when they say that they do so-and-so at this job, you'll say, oh yeah, that's no problem, I can do that. It's not professional, and it shows that it's disrespectful. Okay, and Also, so that being said, also make sure you're listening, because listening is a really important part of every job. So if you are able to listen to them speak in the job interview, it shows them you'll be able to do that in the job itself. And then, as I said, like when you're leaving, handshake if possible. If not, just make sure you thank them for taking the time, for everything they've done for you, that you hope to hear from them. And that being said, another really great thing to do after the interview is follow up with them. It doesn't have to be a letter, as this picture says, but it is really helpful if you call them or send an email to just thank them and say that you look forward to hearing from them. As you can see, not many people do that, but it keeps the person doing the employing that you're fresh in their mind. They remember you. It's very memorable. Okay, so now for some online interview tips. While most of those can remain, as we just talked about, also relevant in online interviews, there's also a few other things you need to consider. The first would be that you want to make sure that there's no possible interruptions. So if you're doing it in your living room, you tell whoever you're living with that this is happening so that there's no interruptions. That can be very unprofessional and distracting for both of you. Make sure that you have a plain background. You don't want to have a whole lot going on because it's also distracting. And you don't want to have personal items. It looks messy. And you always want to test your technology before, because it can be really frustrating for both of you when you go to sign on and then suddenly your microphone's not working or suddenly you can't hear them. So those are things in addition to what we just talked about for online interviews. And I will also just list a few common mistakes that people do. So as I already mentioned, in the waiting room, being on your cell phone, but that also goes in the interview itself. Don't take it out, don't have it out, make sure it's on silent. The only time it would be appropriate is if they asked you a question about your schedule or something, and you didn't know, and you asked, oh, is it okay if I always ask? And then again, just the timing. Don't be too early, don't be too late. Make sure you're dressed appropriately. Make sure that you have company knowledge. Don't use filler words or like or or ahs. You can always pause, not say anything for a little minute to gather your thoughts for your answer. It also doesn't look good to badmouth past employers. So they may say, oh, why did you leave your previous job? And don't say, oh, because Bob, the manager, was a bad guy. It doesn't sound good. So just make sure that you have those answers prepared that make you still seem in a positive light, as well as your past employer. Again, also bad body language. So the slouched over, as we previously mentioned, things like that. And also, don't go in with food or drink. Not even a coffee. It looks bad, and it just seems very unprofessional. Okay. So next, we will watch these two examples of interviews, and we will compare and contrast them. So we will do that now. What can we tell about the two different things with a show of hands? What were some of the good things that happened, and what were some of the bad things that happened? Yes, so posture is a big one. Eye contact, the way she's dressed, though she's not dressed poorly. She also just showed that she had a lot of her own interests. She was more worried about benefits and being able to work from home and things like that right off the bat, which really just shows that she's looking out for herself and not the company. Next, we will break out into partners, and we will do practice interviews. So I have a list of questions up on the board here. You don't have to ask them all, just whatever you feel, and take turns interviewing each other, and think about your answers and your skills, and keep in mind your own body language, eye contact, things like that. So we will do that now. We will take about 10 minutes to do that, and then we will come back together and talk about what we learned. And I will be coming through to see how everyone is doing as you do this. So, okay, now that we are back, you guys did a great job. And now I will show you some resources. So up here I have a resources. Everyone will get a handout of this with the links, and I can email it to you as well because I have your emails.